Magic reveals itself to those who remember where to look for it. This is Magic Hour, and I'm your host, Taylor Page. Welcome back to Magic Hour, everyone. I'm your host, Taylor Page.
And I'm your producer, Claire. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
So excited for this episode today. It's our listener question episode, which is always so fun. And I got the inspiration yesterday and I emailed Claire about it. And I was like, let's start including listener stories. And maybe we'll do whole other episodes on this where I don't just answer questions, but where we start to expand your idea, not just of my experience, but the other hummingbird community experiences of past loved one visits, of synchronicities, of things that have felt magical in your life. And it's almost like we can create this virtual scrapbook of a miracle journal for the collective.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much, Taylor. That's so beautiful. And then we get to hear all about all of your magic moments. So please send those in to us. I love this idea.
Yes, and so much magic happens every day, and everybody's brand of magic is different too. So if you only hear about my stories over and over and over again, it's like, that's great and it expands your mind, but that's just one note. And together we can create a beautiful song that's different than just my note. So send it in. I want to hear from all of you. I want to hear the magic. Contact at magichourpod.com, and we will record some listener stories episodes, and I'll branch off, I'll comment on them, we'll talk about the stories, and it will just be so beautiful. So that really lights me up right now. So as we're recording this, it's 4th of July, and I have been thinking a lot about the moral state or the emotional state of the United States, especially on July 4th, where it's like patriotism and all of these things feel really far away for a lot of us in the United States right now. And you know what? I don't think it's just the United States, because as I speak to my international friends, I know that a lot of us are really frustrated with our governments around the world, and that a lot of what governments are doing don't reflect what the people want, even in quote unquote democracies. So I want to talk a little bit about a download that came through to me that feels... What do I want to say about this? So talking about politics is something that I feel a moral obligation to in circumstances where I think my message makes a difference. When it comes to sharing things online, I was just telling this to Claire, I feel like, sometimes posting about political things online feels like posting into an echo chamber where people are either already agreeing with you, or I don't know, social media just doesn't feel like a safe or productive space for me these days. It feels like a place where there's a lot of hate and anger and outrage, and I feel like I'm not changing anybody's mind. I'm only stirring things up and inviting more chaos into my life. So I'll always be a proponent for peace and justice and do my best. And, social media is one way to share your voice, but there's so many others. And I feel a lot more comfortable sharing my voice on this podcast than social media, because I trust the hummingbird community, and I know people here are like-minded. And even if we don't agree 100%, I know we can engage in a respectful dialogue where I don't feel that on social media. And I feel like on social media, I'm almost just inviting myself to put a target on my back for random people's opinions. And that's not really what I'm going for. I'm going for more of sharing my voice, which I do feel an obligation to do. And so I always feel a little bit torn pre this podcast, because I'm like, I have so much more to say, but I don't know if social media is the right format for it. But I want to use my voice, and I don't want to stay silent about things that I care about. And so the podcast is like this shiny little beacon of a place that I have a larger format to explain myself and express myself and invite dialogue. So here I am. And I know that politics are really scary right now in the United States, also around the world. We're all one, so I know it's happening on a global scale as well, but this conversation is going to focus more on the United States, but take the messages that apply to you if you're not listening from the States, because we randomly have a big community in Poland. So hi guys, shout out.
I love that. Hi, Poland.
Yeah, hi Poland. I'm part Polish.
I think I might be too, actually.
Oh, wow. How funny. So, the message that was coming through is on the heels of the Supreme Court decision to grant immunity from federal prosecution for official acts to the president. And the implications of this ruling are so sinister. It's such a step towards a dictatorship. And if you are not familiar with Project 2025, that is something that the evangelical Christian community is working to implement in the United States of America, that this first Supreme Court ruling, as well as the Chevron deference that was overturned, is a step towards that. And so here's what I want to say about this from the spiritual perspective, because that's where my voice, I feel, is valuable in this conversation. I'm not a political analyst. I didn't go to college for politics or political sciences. I am connected to spirit and I see the energetics of things. And so I want to contribute my perspective to this. So as we know, and by the way, take this with a grain of salt, because when I say our beliefs create our reality, I leave room for the X factor of chaos and the macro scale. So I'm not saying if you have a chronic illness or a baby is born with cancer that they created that with their thoughts. That's not what I'm saying here, and I don't believe that. But I do believe that our deeply held beliefs about life is what we filter our consciousness through. It's what we look for. It's what we expect. And that's why part of the point of this podcast is to help you shift your subconscious beliefs about magic and what's possible and how supported you are by your team on the other side, so that you start to expect magic and see magic and you believe it to see it. So our belief in this country for so long, and especially since the Donald Trump era, is that our vote doesn't matter. We have no power. The country is going down the tubes. We should move out of the country. We have no real say in what happens in our country, and we just have to bear it. This is a macro belief by the collective where we all feel so powerless and down, especially when we see two candidates in this presidential debate that do not represent us at all and are both not good candidates, and nobody really wants that. And that's almost the one thing we can agree on as Americans is we don't like either of them. And so in this time when we are feeling so frustrated and where the Supreme Court is making rulings that are so scary and stripping even more of our power away, it is more instrumental than ever that we, on a macro scale, just like we do on the micro of I am powerful, I have agency, we have to remember that to save our country. So here's the message that I got about this ruling of the president being protected from anything they do in office, is that this is a collective manifestation based on decades of perceived powerlessness of the collective. We have manifested this ruling because we believed that to be true for so long. We believed that we had no power and that the powers that be could do whatever they wanted and that we are powerless and our vote doesn't matter. And look at the physical manifestation of that. So am I saying that we are fully responsible for that and that we're like that it's our fault? No. I think it's the fault of the people at the top who are purely greedy and evil and in the darkness. But I do want to call attention to this because it's important, because we did co-create with our powerlessness in this country and it's led us to where we are now. And we have become so attached to just individualism. I'm safe. My family's okay. I can struggle through. I can power through. And we've lost sight of who we are as a community and a collective. And we genuinely, I don't know if every American feels this way, but from most of the people in my community, we feel so scared and hopeless and frustrated. And we're co-creating with that. And it's manifesting on a bigger scale. It's proving our beliefs true. These rulings that the Supreme Court are doing are proving our beliefs to be true because we deeply believe it and expect it. And so through this podcast in an election year, I'm hoping to bring on guests that help us remember our power, our potential for activism and change, that wake us up because we are sleeping in a comfort zone. And this is another uncomfortable comfort zone on a macro scale. I talk about that so much on the micro. And if we want to save our democracy and our country, it is so important to remember our power on the macro scale, and to remember that part of walking the spiritual walk is not just I can manifest a red Lamborghini and get $1 million. It's what we can do for the collective. It's how we can make the world a better place. It's how we can be of service to the divine feminine goddess energy. And that's why they try to keep women down, because the new world will be birthed through women, and it can't be birthed without women. Women are the birthers of the new world. And so Roe v. Wade being overturned, attacks on mothers, it's like everything is coming to a crescendo, and I can see so clearly the deeper shadows of the collective that are manifesting these things, just like I can on a client one-on-one session. And so my invitation right now is to question the thoughts that say it's inevitable, we are powerless. There are people working to save our country and our democracy right now. So if you have an idea of how you want to be of service, before you try to start something, know there's probably people already doing it that haven't gotten attention yet. Look up causes that matter to you. Look up ways to get young people to vote, to show people that their vote matters, to engage in calling representatives, in protests, whatever works for you. And remember that we are powerful and that we outnumber those at the top. And that to those at the top, we are economic units to them. We are not even human beings. We are economic units that they think we are stupid. They think we don't know anything. They think they can do these things behind our backs. But in reality, every single human on earth just wants love, safety, and security. Everything else, and dignity. And everything else are these stories from a micro ego level to try to keep us divided. But I truly believe in the power of good. I truly, in a wholehearted way, believe everyone in their heart has goodness. Maybe they've been wounded, but I believe everyone wants to do the right thing on a deeper level. And so let's remember that. And let's start to evolve as a collective and a community as much as possible, and really challenge these narratives that we're powerless and our vote don't matter. Because if we continue to believe that collectively, we will manifest that for this country.
Yes, I am so appreciative of you speaking on this, Taylor, and taking the time to acknowledge it, because I know that myself and my community and so many others are feeling that powerlessness and hopelessness. And, I get it. It's an overwhelming situation that, at times does feel like, well, so I voted, what does it matter? Or, we keep getting stuck with these same people that nobody wants, and it seems impossible, or they're making these choices that aren't in our best interest, or people seem so divided. And I think that can feel really overwhelming, that we all seem so divided and that we don't see eye to eye, or we don't want the same things. And I think what you said is so true. And the more we can remember it, the more we can powerfully come together. What we want, we have in common so much more than being divided. Like, we want the same things. We want to love the people we love. We want to have a good life where we can show up for ourselves and our community and live a life that we feel proud of. I think we all feel that way. Safety, security, love, we all feel that way. And we just have different ideas about how that looks. And something you said too about like the powerlessness, I think it helps me to look back on moments in time where people were even more powerless. Like, speaking of women, like there was a time when women were like virtually powerless in our society. And somehow these badass women came together and created a change where we got the power to vote and we got agency over our own lives. And that is so inspiring to me. And just even for their memory, to honor their sacrifice and their fight, like, I will always vote and exercise that right, because they gifted me that with their fight and their power. And it is so inspiring to see that and know that, like, change is possible, even in a moment where it seems impossible. We have come together as communities and done impossible things. So even in this moment where it feels like, how can we carry on? It's all crumbling. We have each other and we can come together in a powerful way. We just have to choose it.
I couldn't agree more. And it reminds me of when I waited 7 hours in line in Studio City to vote. And I was grateful and proud to stand in that line for however long it would take. And I felt the spirit of all the women who fought for me to have that right standing with me in that line. And we were all, people ordered pizzas for the people in line. And I just think the volunteers who work the polls are such earth angels. And they were like such angels, like working and supporting everything. And I met such cool, like-minded people. And we mixed, I'm still friends on Instagram with a guy I met in line. It was like such a beautiful community and all different types of people out there. And it's so true. Like, I'll never take for granted my right to vote. And I'm not saying with these messages that it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's not going to be an uphill battle, but if we can't at least remember our power, then we have no chance. And so the very first step is rewriting our stories about powerlessness, hopelessness, because they want us fatigued. They want us outraged. They want us overwhelmed. And they shake a shiny little hand in one area and then sneakily pass something on the bottom. And I also have to say, I think the root of where a lot of the disagreement comes from is a very loud minority that they amplify the voices of to make it seem like there's more of them than us. And those are the people that don't understand the basic tenets of separation of church and state in this country, which is what we were founded on. It's not that you can't practice your religion. It's not that you can't live in exact accordance of your values, but that's not what the United States of America are about. And so when you get really discouraged that Americans are so divided and this and that, remember, it's a really loud minority that is trying to make us feel that way. But overwhelmingly, I believe that people, especially if you engage them in dialogue where you start with commonalities, where you start with family. And I know too, in discussions with people, I'm actually working on this in therapy, instead of being like, this is my advice for you, which is what I want to do, being like, this is my observation. Can you explain to me your point of view or why you think this? That might open a more productive dialogue than both of us trying to get each other to show up the way we think we should. And yeah, there's people who you'll just plain disagree with. But I think there's a much stronger base of people who want freedom and justice and liberty for all, which are the values of this country. And so just never forget that. And I think being a true patriot in this moment, happy 4th of July, is remembering our power. And now we need a new generation of founders for the next chapter of this country, because where it's going is a manifestation of us believing that we're powerless to do anything else. And I think the majority who are kind and good and in their heart and want freedom are the sensitive people, the spiritual people. We also have to be warriors for the light. We have to be warriors for the good. Even Joan of Arc was a warrior for the angels. So, that's my message on that. And I will try to support the community through guests that shine even more light on the magic that's possible in this specific area, because I'm not an expert on this. I can only tell you the observations that I make energetically.
I love that. And I really loved what you said about, I do think a lot of us are very sensitive and in this space and can feel that powerlessness so deeply, but our sensitivity and our connection to our spirituality can be a powerful tool, because like you said, if we can internally shift our mindset, our beliefs around what is possible. We talk about that a lot, and I feel like I'm doing a lot of that work for my own life. Where am I telling myself the things that I want aren't possible, or that I am limited, or what's possible for me is limited? And now how can I do that on this macro scale? And that shows our power. And that's something we can just do internally, work we can do from our couch, from our seat, from our internal space. And that will have a ripple effect. And to me, that feels really tangible and powerful.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I could not agree more. Okay, I feel a lot better that that message is out there because it's been weighing on my heart for a couple of days, and I'm like, I have to share this on the next Magic Hour. It's actually been weighing on my heart since that ruling, so I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to talk about this. Shall we transition into some listener questions?
Yes, let's do it.
You never know what you're going to get on our episodes. Like, you'll click on a listener episode question, and there will be a long tangent about politics. That's just the way we roll.
But that's what's going on right now. And absolutely everyone I know is thinking about it and talking about it, and it's weighing heavily on their heart. And like you said, this is a place where we come to remember our magic, and we can do that in every space, even in the icky space of politics. Like, where can we find the magic in there and transform our relationship with it?
Yeah. And like magic, spirituality, it's not separate from activism. It's like that's an important part of being a witch, is being an activist and being a steward for the earth and for beings that have less power than you, or don't remember their power as much as you, or don't have a voice as much as you. And so I think it's inherently interconnected. And when we are severed from our part of service and stewardship, our magic becomes more individualistic and shallow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And now we're really going into listener questions.
Okay, we've got a lot of fun ones. I am going to start with one about astrology, because I know you're an expert, and we don't often talk about a lot about astrology, except when we ask people their big three, you usually like dive in and give us some fun insight. So yeah, we can dive in a little bit more. Hello, I love your podcast. Thank you. I have a question which I have never been able to find a satisfactory answer to. What are the principles behind astrology? I can get behind the idea that the moon influences the tides, and human beings are mostly water, so the moon must influence us as well. And I can also understand that we are in the middle of enormous magnetic gravitational forces among and between the planets in our solar system, so those forces must influence us. But I don't understand the idea that the way the planets are arranged at the moment when we are born will imprint qualities or characteristics on us for the rest of our lives. I would love to hear a 101 deep dive into the principles that began the practice of astrology. Thank you for considering this, Liz.
Beautiful question and so relevant. Thank you so much for that, Liz. And Liz is a regular client of mine, so shout out. Much love. I know which Liz wrote this. So this is a question that I had as well, because as you know, I am a grounded approach to all of this work. I'm not, even though I am an intuitive astrologer, which means I literally feel the energy of the planets, which is sort of its own answer to this question in itself, is that highly sensitive beings are attuned to what the planets are doing, and that throughout time, the observations of patterns and the ways that we feel and what's happening on Earth are how we've collected the data for this. So let me rewind, because astrology is a very ancient practice, and I'm talking like thousands and thousands of years old, because human beings like to feel in control. Like to feel like we know what's going on. And that's true of our ancestors as much as us. And what's one thing that is so big to measure that we want to feel like we understand, and we want to feel like we can predict, and we want to feel like we can know more about it? It's time. Time is so big of a concept that astrology became a way that ancient people started to put markers and interpretations to cycles of time. And so astrology is truly a measure of time through the cosmos. And so I'm reading this book right now, which is partially why I love this question. It's called A Scheme of Heaven by Alexander Boxer. And it's fascinating. I'm only like 160 pages in, but it's all about the history of astrology and how we got to where we are today. And it's full of so much good information. So for this question, I'm going to take a sample size of data from the book to paint a picture for you guys, but there's so much more. This is such a big topic. It would have to be even longer than my Arthur Finley College series, you guys. It'd have to be like a 10-part series. Maybe someday, and maybe I'll get Alexander Boxer on the pod because his work is amazing. So think about these structures like the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge. They're lined up to the solstices and the equinoxes, and they measure time and the wheel of the year and the sun and the moon and eclipse. Like everything is lined up with these. And like I'm pretty sure Orion's belt matches up with like some of the pyramids. Like there are things with constellations and the pyramid tips, and these are thousands of years before the first recorded horoscope. So unfortunately, the Great Library of Alexandria, which was where there was like a capital of scientific exploration during the Hellenistic age and was a huge place for the birth of astrology, modern day astrology, that library was destroyed. I think about it like every night before I go to sleep. But the message that I get is that all that wisdom still exists within us because our ancestors exist within us. We just have to remember it, and we will. But a lot of stuff has been lost. A lot of stuff has been severed. And in a moment, I'll get into the earliest recorded horoscope. But when you look into the process and the way it developed, basically, astrology was a science in the old days. It wasn't separate from astronomy. And every single day, every day like clockwork. And remember, this was before social media. They had a lot of time on their hands. These astronomers, astrologers, astrologer priests would look at the skies, take detailed notes of exactly where everything was, and then write down what happened that day. Oh, the market prices are this. The fish quality is this. There are invaders at our back wall. And they would start to notice the patterns through millennia of observation. And then they would start to find the constellations. And this was what was so trippy to me, is when I would read this book, I would see ancient astrology clips from the book excerpts where it would be like Scorpios love war. And there would be like things that ancient astrologers noticed. And they were a little bit, ancient astrology was definitely very different than what we have today. It reflected kind of the more brutal survival, short life nature of what it was like in ancient times. But something I'm really struck about, especially as a theater major in my theater history classes, when I would read plays from antiquity, was how they're exactly the same as us. Like, we're not that different than our ancestors. It's not like they were some uncivilized barbarians. Like, they wanted the same things. They had sense of humor. They wanted love and family and everything we want. And reading their plays, like, blew me away. And so it's same with astrology. People would, for millennia, record the passages of time and understand like how that affected things, and then people would come to consult with them and be like, what does this mean for me? So even people back then were doing the same exact thing as me and my clients, and that's what's so amazing. So I want to go in now to something that really blew my mind from this book. So that's the background, millennia of people observing the passages of the moon, the stars, and the sun, and it really comes from the just background of observation. So it's less about the gravitational pull and this and that, which I'm sure science might catch up one day and give us more answers about why that affects us. But it's more about recorded history and repetition and patterns throughout almost the dawning of humanity. Like, especially when you see the stars and the sky without light pollution, do you know how magical, like what the ancients would see when they looked up at the sky? There is a fascination from the dawn of time about how the stars affect us and how we are made of stars and all of these things, and they were so advanced. This is something that blew my mind. I don't know if this was the earliest horoscope, but I will say in the book they talk a lot about ancient Egyptian tablets that reference the sky and the stars. And in the book it's really cool because there was actually a medieval birth chart and I could read it based off of modern day knowledge, and I thought that was really cool. So it's just so cool, and it tells the whole evolution, but basically it's so old. And now I want to go into the birth of more modern day astrology and how we got here. So in 650 BC, in Nineveh, Assyria, and I'm going to butcher these names and I'm really sorry, in the British Museum object K.3563, which is 70 tablets called, and I'm sorry, Enuma Anu Enlil, 70 tablets foretelling eclipse season omens, where astronomer priests, who were sort of the fusion of science and the divine, which is very close to modern day astrologers, especially if you're an intuitive astrologer like me, would see the patterns and then use them to foretell what was coming so that they could tell the king. And astrologers have been part of royal courts for millennia. And in the same way that the FBI works with psychics to solve cases, the psychics and people connected to spirit and people connected to astrology have been connected to places of power forever. It's kind of like that famous quote, I forget who said it, like JP Morgan or something said, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. So people in really big places of power have always consulted with astrologers. So back in 650 BC in Assyria, the astronomer priests made these 70 stone tablets. And here, I want to read an excerpt from the book of what they said, because this is going to blow your mind, and it ties in with a really pivotal moment for the birth of astrology. So here's an example of what astronomer priests were saying in 650 BC. If on either the 13th or 14th day of Ululu, the moon is dark, which is an eclipse, the watch passes and it is dark. His features are dark, like lapis lazuli. He is obscured until his midpoint on the west quadrant as it is covered. The west wind blew. The sky is dark. His light is covered. The son of the king will become purified, i.e., will perform the Elulu rituals for ascension to the throne, but will not take the throne. An intruder will. Princes in the west. For 8 years, he will exercise kingship. He will conquer the enemy army. There will be abundance and riches in his path. He will continually pursue his enemy, and his luck will not run out. So this was a prophecy made in 650 BC, as I've said, by the astronomer priests. Fast forward to 323 BC, almost 300 years later. Alexander the Great, on the 13th day of Elul, during an eclipse, conquers King Darius III of Persia. He came from the west, and he ruled for 8 years until he passed, I forget which age he was, but he passed young. And he bridged the west and the east and created the, Hellenistic dawn and all of this. And that was foretold in a tablet from 300 years before.
That's wild.
Yes, it blew my mind when I read that in the book, and I think that is so magical. And so we have well-documented records of this in history, so we can cross-reference them. And it was the 13th day of Elul. The west wind was blowing. Alexander the Great did come from the west, and the king did the rites but didn't ascend to the throne because he conquered him on that day. And it's also an added layer because eclipses have always been so important in astrology, and modern day astrologers still focus a lot on eclipses as big times of change and transformation and death and rebirth and big cosmic shifts. And if you think about the ancient people, the whole sky going dark is so ominous. And so there was a big fascination on eclipses. And astrology affects our everyday life, like eclipses and the moon being full. It's like we can't help but be drawn to that. And since the earliest times in history, we would question, like, what does this mean for us? How do I feel during this? And as I said, this was a science for them. So they really looked at this and would pass down the knowledge to their son or their whatever to do the next generation of the work. And all of these records would continue. And so astrology was huge for the ancient Romans as well. And ancient Roman astrologers would basically boast that they had an unbroken line of astrological wisdom that would go back anywhere from 700,000 years to 1.4 million years. So maybe they were just boasting and they were proud, and who knows, but that just shows the ancient nature of this. And so much has been lost when the Great Library of Alexandria was destroyed. And so I practice Western astrology, and Western astrology is basically a mix of Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, and Roman basically influenced. And because Alexander the Great conquered Persia, his goal was to bridge the East and the West. And that had a big impact on astrology because the ancient Greeks, as we know, were huge into philosophy and the sciences, and astrology was a science at that time. And so there's a principle called syncretism of the Hellenistic age, where basically, because Alexander bridged the gap, which I think it's so cool that he had a prophecy about him in those tablets, and then he also has such a hand in modern day astrology. So I love the way it all comes together. Because he bridged the gap, it became a melting pot. People from different places, because his influence spread as far as India. And so there are, of course, Indian astrology, Vedic astrology is different than Western astrology, and everyone has their own stuff. But there starts to find a blend with this syncretism of the Hellenistic age, where we take a little bit of this and we take a little bit of that. And that's like sort of evolved into more modern day astrology. But something that I find so interesting, and I'm going to butcher this this word again, so I'm sorry. But in the 2nd or 3rd century, there's a text called the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And it's ironic to me that the Bible is the first recorded place of like the actual modern translation of astrology. So Isaiah warns the daughter of the Babylonian to heed her advisors, or the Horve Shamayim in that text, which literally translates to observers of the heavens, which became in the Greek translation astrologai, which is where we get astrology from today, observer of the heavens, which was literally first recorded in that Greek translation of the Bible. So if people that follow the Bible tell you that astrology is like Satan's work or whatever, just remind them that actually in early translations of the Bible, Mary herself would pay attention to the observers of the heavens and what they were warning her. And in Matthew's translation of the Bible, he used the word magi instead. And so we know like the 3 magi's, that story. And so that was the name for the ancient Persian diviners and the root of the word magic. So I just wanted to share that as well. But something I found I have it here in my notes. 410 BC is the oldest horoscope we have. So 650 BC is older, but that wasn't a horoscope about an individual person. It was about like eclipse predictions by astronomer priests. The oldest record we have of like, you'll go to the fish market and prices will be good, and like a actual horoscope, is from 410 BC from Babylon. And yeah, the most stunning thing is that's thousands of years after Stonehenge and the pyramids. So we know there was so much more connection to astrology, but this is just the oldest recorded horoscope that we have. But something I find really funny about ancient astrology, ancient Western astrology, is that, especially with the huge influence of the Greeks on it, is that astrologers were mostly Stoics. So this idea that we have of modern astrology being like, there are both good and bad in the chart, and you can be in charge of your own destiny, and your chart is a tool for self-reflection. It's like, no, that was not their view. Their view was like, well, Saturn squaring Mars, like you're going to die in war. Like they would be so stoic about it. And their whole thing was like, so might as well not try. Like everything is predestined. It's written in the stars. Why bother yourself? Just like, this is what it says. And they were just super stoic about it. So I found that to be so kind of funny when I read the book and I see their translations. And there are ancient astrology books like Valens and some other well-known astrologers from antiquity that you can read, and you can read their horoscopes and what they attribute to each sign. And it's just been an evolution in the making of thousands of years. And it's evolved even more into what we have today. And now it's evolving into pop astrology, which is like digestible content on social media. Like if the Stoic ancient astrologers saw memes about each sun sign, they would be like, what the hell is going on? They were much more like sort of brutal about what astrology meant. So I just find it to be so fascinating. It's a huge topic, but basically the short answer is it's been a scientific study since almost the dawn of humanity of how the stars affect us, and it's slowly evolved into what we have today.
Wow, that's so cool. I always knew that, ancient cultures, and especially like tribes and paganism, they revered the sun and the moon and in deep, deep ways. But it's so cool to know that these like horoscopes exist and that this has been going on for so long. A follow-up question, I guess, and maybe there isn't an answer, but the cataloging of this and the deciphering of this has been going on forever. And so we're finding and seeing patterns that we can then ascribe to the different movements of the planet. So when, Pluto is here, generally it seems that this kind of energy is happening. But on a deeper level, do you have any thoughts about like why that is? Like, obviously there's like gravitational pull and stuff, but do you have any instincts about why the movement of a particular planet would affect us in a particular way?
Yeah, I think this topic is so interesting because we observe the what. We observe the cause and effect from the planets, and the why is such an interesting, and I think that's where more of the mystic side comes in when it comes to astrology. And by the way, I am not a historian. I'm not an astrological historian. Like Alexander Boxer is amazing. I've only read 160 pages of his book. So I'm sharing what I've gleaned, and I know this is such a big topic that is so much bigger than even I can scratch the surface of. But what I want to speak to is that it kind of goes back to my first answer that those of us who are really energetically sensitive can feel the energy of each planet. And that is like my introduction to astrology was not reading the ancients and even taking a course. I was almost completely self-taught. My mom taught me a lot. She learned from Dr. Michael Lennox, and I got a lot from that, but a lot of my astrological knowledge is just a knowing in my body of what a birth chart feels like to me and how the bigger picture comes together. So there is this sort of ineffable quality. That being said, when we discover new planets, because keep in mind, the ancient astrologers didn't have the technology to see Neptune, Uranus, or Pluto. They were too far away. So in ancient astrology, Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Pisces is ruled by Jupiter because they didn't discover Neptune and Pluto yet. So there is this council of astrologers who look at the planets when we discover them, who look at their attributes, how far away they are, if they're a cold planet, if they're a hot planet, and they start to decide, okay, this is what we're going to name the planet. This is the myth connected to this name, because all of the names are kind of connected to like myths or deities or figures from antiquity. And they start to decide as like almost a council, like what that's going to be. The asteroids and all of that. There's like a group of recognized astrologers that decide these things. Also, the further away the planet is, the less it affects us on a personal level and the more it affects us on a collective level because it's farther away from the sun. And so the sun and the moon are like the two luminaries. Like those are the two most important things in astrology. And ancient astrologers would speak to that too. But we can start to understand through observation the ways that planets interact with each other. And it's interesting to me that I feel like astrologers throughout the ages almost have downloads about things, or like, spirit works through them to weave it all together. It's so interesting, and we'll have to get someone on to talk more about this that's more knowledgeable. But what I'll say is, like, through a combination for the astrologers who are more scientific, their observations. And by the way, astrologers are still doing this. Like on the astrology podcast with, forget his name, I want to say like Neil Brennan or something like that. He goes through every month and talks about what news story happened on what day, what the planets were doing, and times in history where the planets were doing something similar and something similar happened. So this is still happening today, and we're still observing these things. And it's so interesting because astrology truly is the fusion of science and mysticism. And I think that's one side of it. And the other side of it are just people who are a bit psychic, energetically sensitive, and who can literally feel the energy of the planets and translate that into their practice. And it's all just woven together. And that's what's so interesting about that syncretism, Hellenistic age concept, is that astrology is such a patchwork tapestry of so many different beliefs and cultures and history and millennia. And I think that's part of the beauty of it, is that every astrologer works with it slightly different. And I think that's beautiful.
So cool. Yeah, we definitely will have to have some people on and dive into this more because, like you said, it's just a huge topic. And
Yeah. And I'm no expert. Like, I didn't go to astrology school. Like, I'm learning this from a book that I'm reading right now and from my own interaction with the planets and from my mom. But, there are people whose whole careers are like dissecting this. So they would be much more. I should definitely try to find someone to interview if the community is interested in it.
yeah, absolutely. And I always think it's funny that we, like you said at the top of the episode, we live in kind of an individualistic world right now, or with a very like individualistic mindset. And I think sometimes we forget that like we are a part of this rich tapestry that includes everything that is the earth, but of course also everything that is in the cosmos, in the universe. And it's funny that we think that somehow we are separate and unaffected by like the moon and the wind and the sun and all of these elements that are around us and interacting with us are of course affecting us. We are a part of a tapestry. We're not separate from it, even though we're an individual part of it. So it totally makes sense to me that the planets affect us because we're affected by everything that's a part of this experience.
Yeah, which is basically what the Hermetic principles of correspondence are saying, which is the famous phrase, as above, so below, as within, so without. It's just we're all connected, and on a subatomic level, we're literally stardust. So maybe that's the reason that we feel them so strongly, is that we're made of the same substance.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much. Okay, should we dive into another question?
Let's.
This is a question from Laura. How do you navigate through times of grief, especially when it comes to manifestation? I have a hard time trusting and surrendering to the universe because I had the experience of losing my mom at a young age, which was my worst case scenario. Now I am confronted with thoughts like the universe is punishing me, or when I really wish for something, it doesn't come to be true. I am thankful for any insights and shared experiences. Love, Laura.
Oh, Laura, I am so sorry, my love. That is so painful, and I empathize with you so much. And losing my mom was literally my inner child's worst fear come true. So I completely understand that. And I am sending you the biggest hug through the screen right now, through your phone, wherever you're watching or listening to this. And I'm so, so sorry, and you're not alone. So there's a few things I want to say about this because I went through a similar experience for a little bit, and I've heard of clients talking about this too, where it's like our trust has been broken with the universe. But it's not our trust that's really broken. It's our sense of control and safety that has been broken. Because sometimes what I've had to learn, and there's no one answer for this question. I'll just share my musings on it and hope that it helps you in this pathway to feeling safe again in your body after trauma. What I've realized when it comes to loss, and it took me a long time to accept that, is that the way people pass has nothing to do with us. And that was really hard for me to accept, that my mom's soul had to leave when she did for her own reasons. And as much as I wish it was different, it actually had nothing to do with me. And so there's something bigger than what, first of all, we're not in control at all through life. The best we can do is stay in our power, stay in our heart, listen to our guides, stay present, and take one foot in front of the other through life, moment to moment. But when it comes to this question of feeling like I've been let down by the universe, how can I trust again? How can I manifest? That's one element, is realizing that sometimes other people's path is up to them. Like my mom, to use her as an example, chose not to go to the doctor. She could have gotten a life-changing surgery and she could have lived a little bit longer, but she didn't choose that. She chose to leave at this exit point. And for a really long time, I could not accept that. And so the anger you're feeling towards the universe that you feel is responsible for taking your mom, that's the anger I felt towards my mom for not choosing to stay. But that anger is really not anger towards the universe or my mom. It's a harder time accepting that their exit point is not about us and that their soul has to go in the way that their soul has to go. And so I think that's part of the grief process and coming to acceptance. That was a lesson I really had to learn. The other thing I want to say about this is that your higher self still believes in peace and love and trust and manifestation. That part of yourself is still there and it still believes in it no matter what. The hurt inner child is just taking control right now. And she's the one whose voice is like, nothing ever works out. I'm not safe. And so I would recommend that you sit with her, because I remember, going through losing my mom myself. My inner child would be like, why are you acting like everything's okay? I need you to cry with me. And our inner child is our link to being a human. And so no matter what trauma you've gone through, the part of ourself that is in a higher place is often spoken over by our parts of ourself that are wounded. And so instead of taking these subconscious beliefs or conscious beliefs as the truth, I would take them as messengers that there is still a deeper healing process and acceptance that needs to be had by that little girl who felt completely blindsided and pushed into chaos. And so I would recommend doing some inner child work. I would recommend asking her, like, what do you need to feel safe? And, it is this hard truth that the spiritual work that we do does not absolve us of the human experience. There are just tragedies and lessons and things that we come here to experience, and that can be really painful and really difficult, and that is part of the duality of life. And so it's also not to say that even the most spiritual person, nothing bad ever happens to them. I think that's just not a true belief. It's that the most spiritual person might have the ability to move through it with the most grace or compassion. And so I would really look at what your inner child needs, what your nervous system needs, because even before I heard this happen when you were a child, I was going to talk about the inner child, because our higher self and the part of us that is connected to spirit knows these things, knows the truth. But when we go through a tragedy, the core emotion of that tragedy comes up from any time we've had that core emotion in the past. So any time that you start to feel grief or out of control, it might bring up unprocessed things about losing your mom. And that's what can happen, is that after a lifetime of similar experiences with a core emotion, they all stack on each other. And one thing that triggers that one emotion, it brings up everything historically. So, losing a parent while you're still a child is something that is so monumental and forces you to grow up and hold yourself in a way so early on, and it's so unfair. And I think be patient with yourself, be patient with your inner child, but remember that fear lies. And those fearful thoughts based on the wound from that time period are not the truth. You are supported. Her passing might have had nothing to do with you, as hard as that is to accept. And there's just this bigger message of giving yourself a container to, and I'm sure you've already done a lot of this work, but the fact that these messages are still coming up shows that there's maybe deeper layers to tackle. And I'm being called to even suggest maybe working with hypnotherapy and rewiring beliefs and things like that, because sometimes when they're so stored, and this actually brings me, so I was listening to the Conscious Embodiment podcast. I don't usually listen to other podcasts, but I saw it pop up and there was a guest named Edon something. I don't know his name, but he was on one of the most recent Cosmic Body podcasts, and it's all about somatic healing. And he was talking about how, which is something I'm very interested in, because after my mom passed, I started grinding and clenching my jaw, which I've never done before. And so I know there's a lot held in my jaw, which is very tied to control and clamping down when we feel out of control. And so he was saying, we all know that when we go through a trauma, our mind pushes it to the far back because we can't deal with it. It pushes it to the far back. But the far back is our physical body, and that's what we don't realize. And that resonated as truth to me so deeply. And so what I would also recommend is a layer of somatic healing, because sometimes when we do this cerebral work and we can rationally understand and we talk to our inner child and we reverse these thoughts and we create new mantras, that can only take us so far. If in your fascia, in your nervous system, in different parts of your body, that trauma is still causing heaviness, trying to keep you small and safe. So I think as science evolves, as medicine evolves, we'll realize how deeply trauma and emotions affect our physical body and our physical health. And I think there's also a layer of somatic release that 4-year-old you or 7-year-old you or however old you were when that happened couldn't cope with the magnitude of that loss. And so a lot of it got stored, whether it's in your heart or your hips or your throat or wherever we're carrying it. And I think some level of somatic healing is so necessary too, because what I see in my readings is that no matter how much our mind can cerebralize and understand the logic of it, or even the logic of a healing principle, like I started off answering, if our physical body is still in fight or flight from that trauma and still holding on to it, our nervous system will not feel regulated and safe enough to create a new belief and actually act from it. It will be something that we just think about, but that's not the bigger piece of the puzzle. It's great. That's part of the work. And if we were just doing somatic release without intentionally rewiring and analyzing, that wouldn't be the full puzzle too. But I think what we really need is to realize like mind, body, soul connection. So the mind is good. That's what I'm talking about. Talk to your inner child, rewire beliefs, like doing that cerebral work, talk therapy, all of that's part of the mind. The body is this somatic healing, this release, this sort of body work that can help you feel lighter and release things and process things. And then the soul is connecting with your angels and guides and letting them hold you and letting them shine light on you and remembering your mom is in spirit with you too and starting to open up on that. And I think that's the trifecta. And without one part of the puzzle, the other two aren't as strong. It needs to be all three for true healing after a trauma. And I can empathize with that so much. And I'm actually going to have an episode on the exact grief recovery method that I did after my mom passed to help release a lot of this. And I'm still working on it. And I felt the same way as you after my mom passed, and I was 30 when she passed. So I can only imagine how compounded that experience was for you. And I'm so sorry, and I hope that in speaking about this, I gave you even one idea to take this healing journey to the next level, because there is no one quick answer for a question like this. It's so layered, and without talking to you and giving you a reading and personalizing with your unique blend of history and dynamics and what I feel into, there's only so much I can say. So based off of not having you with me here and not being able to read for you, this is the best I can say for you here and now.
That was really beautiful, Taylor. Thank you for offering all of that guidance on that topic. I know many people will connect to that. And I saw a beautiful quote recently about grief that I can't remember it exactly, but basically it was saying that grief is one of the fullest human experiences because we are completely out of control within it. And that's terrifying to us. But it is a representation of the love that we feel for this person. It is the continuing love that we have for this person. And while it is quite painful, it's also such a beautiful expression of how deeply they matter to you and affected you. I think that's a nice thing to wrap yourself in sometimes when it is so heavy, that it is also just an expression of deep, deep love.
Yeah, they say grief is love in another form. And it's so interesting because, you know, my grief when my mom first passed was so bad that I couldn't even lift my head. I was like a shell of a person. I didn't even have the energy to lift my head. And that's how I knew Ari and I were forever, because we were still boyfriend and girlfriend at that point. And the way he showed up for me and my family, it's like, there's a reason we got married so fast. It's because we went through crazy stuff together in our first year and second year. And we just knew after a year, like, this is it. And so I was in such a difficult place. And I genuinely felt in that moment that to be happy would be a betrayal to my mom's energy and how much I loved her. And this might not be Laura's situation, but I'm sharing this for anybody in the hummingbird community that has gone through loss that might feel the same way. And I think on my journey, I had to realize that grief also lies. That's why it's not a pure form of love. Like, it is an expression of how much we love them sometimes, is just the sadness we feel at their loss. But I don't quite agree that it's another complete form of love, because grief also lies. And some of the lies that it tells is, if you really loved them, then how could you be happy right now? And I think it's important to call out that as you grow and heal, especially as I open to my mediumship journey, you realize that we're the ones suffering here. They're okay on the other side. They are reconnected to pure love and they're always with us. But we're the ones suffering here. And to move on, which I don't even like saying that. It's not moving on. It's like integrating more instead of being in the pure fight or flight chaos that losing someone brings up, is not only an act of self-love, which is important, but it's actually an act of loving your past loved one, especially a parent. The parts of them that are the best parts live on through us. And us, like my mom's kindness and generosity, and something my aunt said at her memorial that really resonated with me is like, as a tribute to our past loved ones, how can we take on their best qualities and let that shine through us? And my mom was the most like caretaking, generous, beautiful soul. And I've tried to take on more of that since she passed as a tribute to her. And so I think grief can sometimes be interwoven with fear and guilt as well as love. And it's this like complicated medley of emotions. And that's where I just ask you to be really vigilant. Even for Laura's question, there might be this subconscious belief that's so buried of, how can I be okay without my mom? How could I really thrive without my mom here? That there might need to be an undoing. And that's where some of the stuff of, can I really manifest? Am I really supported? There might even be a deeper root feeling there of, how can I go on without her? And how could life be easy for me without her here? So things can be really sneaky. And I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm not saying Laura has those beliefs, but I'm just saying explore, shine a light on it, look into it, and remember those 3 points of the triangle that are all needed for true deep healing.
Yeah, I'm so interested in exploring further the somatic healing. Is that?
Somatic healing. Yeah, maybe I'll see if I can get that same guy on here because he was really cool.
Yeah, and so interesting too, because I think in our journeys of healing, sometimes it can feel a little difficult to take it out of the cerebral and make it a real change. Like I struggle with that. It's like logically, I know, okay, you have this limiting belief and it's not true and it's causing you a bunch of pain and you're acting from it again. And I'll, sometimes I'll write out like the limiting belief and a new belief about it. But it can feel a little hard sometimes to fully make that change. And I think it sounds like there's a bigger piece of the puzzle, like you were saying, that maybe like things stuck in your body or in a way that you can't just think your way out of it, but that you need to move through it in a more holistic way.
Absolutely. Thinking yourself through it is only one part of the puzzle. And I think that's why we get so frustrated and stuck, because talk therapy is a bit antiquated. It like worked in the past, but like when I worked with, shout out Rachel Kelly, who was my therapist after my mom passed. And then a lot of other family stuff happened after my mom passed. And I felt like I was losing my whole family at once. And I was going through crisis after crisis. And it was so intense. Why I loved her as a therapist is not only because, one, I do this work and I'm a super harsh critic. And I look at most therapists and I'm like, I can't with you. Like, I'm sorry, but this is just not helpful at all. And I have a different consciousness than you, and that's okay. But what I loved about her and why I went with her is that she guides you through things like putting your hand on your heart and breathing into the emotion there and asking your inner child what they think. And she gets more into these interactive containers that allow you to just listen to the emotions. So she fuses a little bit of that somatic healing in, because she's like, talking about it can only get us so far. And that's all coming from your brain. But your body and your inner child also have things they want to say. And if they feel like their message isn't getting heard, they will turn up the volume. So that feeling, going back to Laura's question of like, I can't do this or I can't do that, that might be the volume turned up on the parts of you that are trying to get your attention for deeper healing and release. And so that's not a bad thing. I actually think that's a good sign. It means all your systems are firing at full capacity, trying to get you in alignment. So I think even shifting our way of thinking about it as a failure or not being as spiritually strong or not being as supported, that's not true. It's actually your guides, your inner child, your emotions, like your heart, all trying to get you to see this limiting belief so that you can rewire it. And I think reframing it that way is a powerful first start. And that's why I loved working with Rachel, because tuning into my inner child, tuning into the wisdom of my heart, tuning into the emotions that were just brewing under the surface with deeper messages that I wouldn't always make room for when I was just trying to go and be productive and keep up with the demands of life and truly not think about my mom. Like even now, I don't let myself really go there because it's like this full on thing. And that's why I loved therapy with Rachel, is because it created the space and the wisdom I got from not talking with even myself or her, talking things through, but just listening to what my body, my inner child, and my heart was telling me, gave me so many more breakthroughs than analyzing ever could.
I really resonate with that because that's been a limiting thing for me with talk therapy, where I feel like, you know, it's one thing to talk about it, but where does that take me? And yeah, I'm definitely going to sit with a lot of this and try and integrate it for myself.
Yeah. And I think talk therapy works really well when you're like working something out with another person, maybe because you like need to hear each other and somebody can help be a mediator and things like that. But I think it misses the mark on being the only thing we do for rewiring trauma in the body and what we've gone through because of that principle of the mind, body, soul that all needs to be connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So I really hope this helps, Laura. And once again, us. And, you know, when people send in questions that are a little more difficult, I think, and I do this in Earth Angel Club sometimes, what I invite us all to do is to, as a collective hummingbird community, hold Laura's name in your mind and send her light. All of us around the world are sending you light, Laura. And for the next like 3 seconds, 3 to 10 seconds, just pause the podcast, breathe. You can even do it longer than that. And whatever color light you feel on your heart, send that to Laura. Send her healing light. Send her visions of peace. And anybody who writes in something that is as vulnerable and beautiful as Laura did, I want to support you however we can. So let's all send her light. And anybody who feels like they aren't sure if they can write in something scary or heavy or whatever, this is a safe space for all of it. I have all my planets in the 8th house and I'm ready to go there with you guys. So yeah, know that no matter what, we will hold you in the light. Always, always, always.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that, Taylor.
So let's transition to sitting with spirit. Welcome to Sitting with Spirit, my loves. I so enjoy the listener question episodes. I just love the questions that you guys send in, and they're so rich, and I know that they help so many people that are feeling the same way. So when you ask your question, just know you're putting voice to something that other people are going through as well, and that's an act of service. I also wanted to add something about the astrology stuff that we were talking about, which is in my personal readings. So I started offering astrology readings, I want to say back in 2019 or 2020. I can't remember, but around maybe the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020, I started offering birth chart readings. And as you guys know, I am maybe not skeptical isn't the best word, but I'm practical and I like evidence. And I think that's like our Neptune and Capricorn generation. So a lot of people around the same age will have Neptune in Capricorn, which is like grounded and practical and likes evidence. And that I definitely feel that with my Neptune placement, which is the ruler of spirituality in our chart. So there you go, more proof of astrology being real. But what I found was before I started my birth chart practice, I believed in astrology, and I didn't just believe in it, I experienced it to be true in my body as a highly sensitive person. But I didn't realize how freaking accurate it was until I started taking clients. And the more I took clients, the more I sat with people from around the world that I didn't know anything about. And I would analyze their chart before I sat with them and write a whole list of notes of things I want to talk about with them. And it was like, okay, I see in the chart like tough mother relationship. Here's what I see here, or I see them doing this kind of work in their chart. And like the more I sat with people, the more that was confirmed. And that was a turning point in my belief of astrology. Was how could I know, sort of similar to mediumship, just the proof being in the pudding of knowing evidence about people and their personality and their life and things like that, just from looking at their birth chart. So for me, that's part of the science too, is like the case study of all of my clients just being so accurate. And sometimes astrology is so accurate that I almost just have to laugh. Like my mom being my best friend, she was an astrologer. Like we would just hear what people's sign were or see what the transits were that day and then see what happened. And we would just have to laugh like 99% of the time. It was just so obvious to us. And so I think people who know astrology and follow astrology can see that it's so accurate. So I just wanted to say that part of that question of like, how do we know it's real? It's like, I've experienced that firsthand with just how laughably accurate it is with my friends, my family, my clients, like everything in my life.
I mean, my big three are so hilariously exactly me. Like, I couldn't be more of a Pisces moon. It's like when I first read the descriptions, I was like, wow, I've just been called out aggressively.
Yes, so true. Same. So I want to transition to the Sitting with Spirit message now, which if you're new to the podcast, this is a segment where I literally sit with Spirit, get messages, take what resonates for you. Resonance is one of our most powerful tools in our spiritual toolbox. And if it resonates, then you know it's for you. And if it doesn't resonate, then it's not what you needed to hear, but maybe there's someone else that needed to hear it today and you can share the message with them. So I find the synchronicities between the messages, the topics, and the astrology, to weave it all together, so incredibly synchronistic and beautiful. Even Claire, who I know you are not consciously thinking about Cancer season and the new moon in Cancer tomorrow, asking a question about a mother wound and the mother that was lost, like that's perfectly in alignment with the astrology. And it shows how our consciousness is interwoven with the stars in this way. It's just like the proof is in the pudding time and time again. And so the other thing that is so tied to Cancer energy, ruled by the moon, is divine feminine energy. And when I was sitting with Spirit, I got this image, and it was so powerful that I wanted to cry, of witches from every time, every place, every type of witch in spirit making a circle around us. And they were all singing a song in their own language that was a song of power to them. And it came through to me as this series of chanting and vibrations that felt so rhythmic and tribal and urgent. And basically the message is, we have been singing our song to you here on earth to help you remember. And now the song is being turned up in a more urgent way. We are singing louder, and the veil is getting thinner, and you can hear our music more. And I got this deep chills of this primal, pure goddess energy of the women in their power from all timelines and places, supporting us through a moment where it's more imperative than ever for us to heal our witch wound, for us to remember our strength, for us to remember our power, for us to remember our connection with spirit, and for us to remember who we really are. And this ties into our ancestors, our great grandmothers taking up the totem and singing this song with us. And it's this lineage of power that we're being reminded of. And the song feels more urgent in pitch to me now. And here's something that's very interesting about this as well, is that there's laces of this righteous anger, this anger of the divine feminine at the bastardization of the human experience and what's important. And it is righteous and it is deep and it is primal. And they're asking us to feel it and not let it be all consuming, but let it fuel our powerful rebirth of where we want the world to go next. And why isn't our vision of a new world just as important as the people at the top who are in this evil mode of greed and so disconnected from their soul? And so I just feel this sense of like, all of these witchy women in a circle, all of their different beliefs, spiritual practices, and oral traditions throughout timelines, weaving together in this powerful way that is in the womb of all of us, in the cauldron of our womb, ready to spill over. And that's what I feel is like they're crying their tears into our cauldron of our womb space and asking us to move forward in a legacy of power, in a legacy of magic, and in a legacy of truth, because we have strayed so far from it. And the message that I get from them is that many of us here who chose to come back have walked with them as sisters. And so a lot of us with the witch wound, all of us with the witch wound, have had lifetimes where we were connected to magic and spirit and priestesshood and nature. And some of our spirit guides are our sisters who walked with us in that tradition, in that lifetime, helping us remember now. And so those people singing their song, weaving this basket of remembrance around us in a sacred container for us to explore. They're spirit guides that you know, that you have walked with in your most magical lifetimes, and that they are supporting you to remember that. And you were one of the selfless souls who decided to come back and make a difference here on earth. So that's one of their messages too. I also got, as I was getting that message, I saw my third eye lighting up. And I do feel like we're in a time where psychic phenomenon and the veil is getting thinner. And so it's like more imperative than ever to not just trust our head, but to trust our heart and our third eye as well, and the truth of our throat chakra as well. And so I see psychic development, intuitive development, mediumship, people coming online, people being attracted to this work. It's like at a fever pitch. And it coincides with this witchy song getting louder and louder and louder until we have no choice but to remember the music that's a part of us. And so follow that, follow that, follow that, follow that. So moving on to the messages from our angels now. I saw a swan as an animal guide. And when I see swan as an animal guide, it is the sign of a late bloomer and a transformation and a trusting the timing. So swan is such a graceful animal guide, and it's all about transitioning into the most powerful, beautiful version of self yet. And so if you feel frustrated, if you feel like things are coming later than you want them, if you feel like things are taking time to develop, just know that you're being led by this beautiful swan energy that's helping you bloom in perfect timing. And when I see swan, I always like to say the best is still yet to come. And so the last message that I want to give is a message that I've shared before, but feels really important to share again, which is it's not our job to heal our family or change their consciousness. And it can be so difficult to be a part of a family with a different consciousness than you, or a part of a family that rewards dynamics that are toxic. And I always say healthy cannot coexist with sick. And it can be so difficult that when you start to create boundaries or stand in your power or protect your light, they withhold love from you because you're no longer doing the dance of toxicity. And I completely understand that. And the message here is that for many of the people listening here, if not everyone, we are people doing the spiritual work. We're highly sensitive. We know there's more to life than just materialism and productivity. And we can see so clearly the diagnoses on our family, the advice we would give our family, how they could live a better life. We see it so clearly. But it's not our business. If they don't come to us for advice, we can't give them that because they're not in the consciousness to receive it. And they're almost the people least likely to listen to us, because when you're in the same family with them, there's like a whole host of history and dynamics. It's like we're the last people they will respect to give messages. And so as somebody trying to foster the light and go on a healing journey and help other people, even being born into a family of different consciousness of people that you see they need healing isn't about healing them. It's about creating the structure, boundaries, and framework to protect your own light, no matter the circumstances that your family create. That was your lesson of incarnating into that family. And it can be so painful when we don't want to leave them behind or we feel guilty. But if you have to exist in a dynamic where you have to betray yourself to get love, that is not real love. And the best we can do for our family is always be loving to them, but firm in our boundaries and set an example. Lead by example. And if they want to come to you, they will. And if not, love them for where they're at to the best of your ability. And it can be so, so painful. And I completely understand that. But that's a place where we can give our power away, where it feels so painful, where a lot of our energy drains go. But truly, our lesson to incarnate into a family like that is breaking cycles. And part of that is healthy boundaries, self-love, and leading by example. And that's really the best we can do. And that is such an important message today, especially coming up on the Cancer new moon. It's like such a time of ancestral healing and lineages. And that's why I wanted to do the ancestral healing guided meditation for Earth Angel Club. You know, by the time this comes out, that will be last week's, because it's so prevalent right now. And it's so ripe right now for memory and nostalgia and inner child and inner world and mother wounds. And all those things are coming up because the Cancer Capricorn axis is all about mother, father, home, all of those themes. And so just be in your truth, protect your light, because that is how you will ultimately be able to show up in the world in a way that not only helps yourself, but helps the other people who actually need you, which, as difficult as it can be, if your family isn't asking for it, they're not the ones that need it then, because they won't be open to it. Or maybe they need it, but because they're not open to it, it will never be received. So I hope this message helps whoever needs it, and send it to whoever needs it so that more people hear this. And I just want to open it up to you, Claire. Anything else you want to say about that?
I'm just so blown away by the vision of those witches in a circle chanting with us and walking with us and helping us remember our magic. I often think about the women that came before, and there's like a heaviness in my heart thinking about their experiences on Earth and how their light wasn't fostered and their gifts weren't encouraged, and they had a limited experience because their societies didn't value them. And imagining them in this powerful sisterhood, supporting us and pouring their love and magic into us, I will think about that all day. That is so beautiful and powerful and encouraging. I am so moved by that.
Oh, I feel the same way. And I was so grateful to receive that message. And I also found it so poignant how the music's getting louder as the veil gets thinner, and how we can hear it more, and how it's never been more important for us to not only hear the music, but learn a new dance along with this music as well.
Yes.
Yes. Well, have a beautiful, beautiful week, everyone. This magic hour was certainly full of a lot of different types of questions and waves of emotions. We laughed, we cried. There was a lot in this magic hour. So take a moment after this to just integrate, maybe journal, maybe digest, maybe sit in the presence of your angels, whatever you need to do, because it's been a very, very full magic hour. And we're just so, so grateful to have you here. So thank you so, so much.
For more information on Taylor and her work, go to angelsandamethyst.com or connect with her on Instagram at angels_and_amethyst. She is the one verified account with this name and will never DM you for a reading. If you have any questions about intuition, spirituality, angels, or anything and everything magical, please email contact@magichourpod.com. We will answer listener questions once a month in our solo episodes. Are you an aligned business owner that would like to advertise to our beautiful hummingbird community? Please email contact@magichourpod.com. Make sure you're subscribing to Magic Hour so you never miss the magic. And don't forget to leave us 5 sparkling star reviews. They help more magical people find the pod. Please screenshot and email your 5-star reviews to contact@magichourpod.com, and we will send you a free downloadable angelic meditation and enter you to win an angel reading with Taylor Page. The next giveaway will happen when we hit 111 5-star reviews.
Thank you for listening to Magic Hour with Taylor Page. Remember,